So far, we have only talked about sexual harassment by a business owner or a supervisor or a manager, but there are at least two other ways that sexual harassment can occur in the workplace. One of them is sexual harassment by coworkers. Not your boss, just a fellow coworker that's harassing you. What are the rules with regard to that? And another one is sometimes the harassment is not by anybody within your company. Maybe it's one of the customers of the business that's harassing you. What are the rules with regard to that? So let's look at those two things, and first let's look at sexual harassment by coworkers. And the legal question is, if one of your coworkers is sexually harassing you, is your employer liable for that harassment? And the answer is, well, maybe, only if they either knew about the harassment that was going on and they failed to take corrective action, or the harassment was so blatant that they should have known about it and they failed to take corrective action. So an employer is not liable for harassment by coworkers unless they knew about it or they should have known about it and they failed to take corrective action. So what does that mean? Well, if you get harassed by a coworker at the workplace and you're so upset about it that you just quit and you don't report it to the employer, and then you try to sue the employer for sexual harassment, you will probably lose, especially in today's age when most employers have an employee policy manual that says no sexual harassment will be tolerated in this workplace, and so is the designated reporting person. If you do experience sexual harassment, report it to so-and-so, and they'll report it to the boss, and we'll investigate and take corrective action. If you fail to report it to the designated reporting person before you just quit, and then you turn around and try to sue for sexual harassment, you will lose because the company didn't know about it and you didn't give the company a chance to find out about it and take corrective action. So if there's a reporting person and there's a reporting requirement, you must do the reporting before you leave the place of employment and try to sue. So the employer will only be liable for harassment by a coworker if they knew or they should have known and they failed to take corrective action. Which means if you suffer harassment at the workplace, you must report it. If you just quit and you don't report it, the employer is off the hook. Well, what about if the harassment is not by anybody employed at the company, it's by customers? Is your employer liable for sexual harassment that you suffer from customers? And the answer again is maybe, depending upon the circumstances. If the employer had enough control over the situation that they could have taken corrective action and they didn't, and they didn't take corrective action, then the company is liable, the business is liable. So if you are a waitress at the Denny's, then the Denny's that is right across the street from the ballpark. And so every night that there's a ball game, the fans who got drunk at the ball game come across the street to have a late dinner or an early breakfast at your restaurant, and they're drunk, and while they're there, they're making lewd comments and groping you as the waitress. If you go back and report that to the manager of the restaurant has the power to go out there and say, that's not acceptable treatment of our waitresses. You either knock that off right now or you have to leave. He can control that, and if he fails to control that, then he may have liability, the company may have liability, that is, for sexual harassment. But what if you're harassed by the purchasing agent at a different company when you're the outside salesperson and you're going from company to company making sales pitches? And you go back and tell your boss, every time I go over to Acme Corporation to try and make a sale, the purchasing agent over there makes lewd and suggestive comments. Your boss, he may not have any control over that. He can't control. Do you think he can call the owner of the business where he's trying to sell product and say, your purchasing agent is a lech? Good luck ever selling any product at that company again. So he may not be able to control that situation, and there may not be liability on the part of your company. Of course, he might be able to say, well, you don't have to call on them anymore. We'll send our male salesperson over there. But then you'll lose those commissions, so that's not an ideal arrangement either. Okay, so that's it for harassment by coworkers and harassment by employees. A couple of final notes about sexual harassment at the workplace, and then we will move on to other forms of employment discrimination. What about same gender harassment? Maybe it's a female that's harassing you and you're a female, or maybe it's another male that's harassing you and you're a male. Well, it's interesting because Title VII, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that says no employment and discrimination, it doesn't give any protection to homosexuals, but it does say if you're sexually harassed on the job, whether it be by someone of the opposite sex or someone of the same sex, you are protected against that. So you do have protection for from same-sex sexual harassment. What if the harassment takes place online over the internet instead of in person? If it's by an employee or a coworker or a supervisor, it's the same as if it was done live. And there may still be liability by the company for the harassment. What kind of damages can you recover? If you're forced out of the place of employment, you can recover your lost wages, compensatory damages, and you might be able to recover punitive damages against the employer, but usually not, only if the employer acted with malice or with reckless indifference to the individual's rights. So unless the employer did something that was really gross, they intentionally participated in the discriminatory harassment, or they knew about it and they encouraged it, or they didn't correct it, you're probably not going to get punitive damages. There has to be some kind of malice or reckless indifference to individuals' rights to recover punitive damages from an employer for sexual harassment.